Welcome to Linguistics Tube. On this channel, you will find videos about learning English, as well as more scientific videos about linguistics and psychology, and more general academic topics such as study skills, conducting research, and writing academic articles. This episode is part of my series which explores how to write effectively in English. We will learn about a range of skills which you can use generally, and I will also share my advice for specific writing exams, such as TEM-4 and IELTS. Specifically, this episode is part of my mini-series about the TEM-4 exam. Here, I will discuss the opinion section of the 2016 writing task. Firstly, I will share with you my advice about this section of the essay, and secondly, I will show you some examples from the opinion section written by my students. In this section, I will share some general advice about the opinion section of the TEM-4 essay, and this advice is based on the opinion sections that were written by my students. Regarding argumentative essays, the biggest challenge for many students is not their language, it is their structure. The second biggest problem is their content, specifically the viewpoint and arguments they choose. Therefore, this section will focus on these. Firstly, regarding the hook, it is common for students to not write a hook and instead jump directly from the summary to the thesis statement. Therefore, the introduction consists of only a very short one-sentence thesis statement. Generally, if an essay has a weak introduction, it will probably also have a weak body and conclusion. So, if you start your essay with a weak introduction, you will give the reader the impression that your essay is weak. Therefore, a hook is very important, because not including it wastes a great opportunity to engage the reader and demonstrate an important argumentative writing skill. And demonstrating argumentative writing skills is the goal of this exam. Your hook only needs to be 1 or 2 sentences, as we shall see in the coming examples. Regarding the thesis statement, it is very common for students' thesis statements to be very similar. Usually, they either repeat the title of the essay or present the writer's viewpoint as simplistically as possible. For this essay, the most basic thesis statement might be, in my opinion, parents should not be allowed to take their children on term time holidays, and here are my reasons. To stand out from everyone else, I recommend that you use a more interesting thesis statement than the topic should be banned. Here are a few suggestions. You could present your thesis statement as a question, such as, isn't it obvious that families shouldn't take term time holidays? And then you present your answer to this question in the body section. Another way to do it, which also keeps your introduction short, is to combine the hook and the thesis statement. For example, my viewpoint is encapsulated in the following quote by a famous educationalist: children should not take term time holidays. That could be your entire introduction, and it is unusual and effective. If those techniques are a little too avant-garde for you, you could simply use more interesting language. For example, it is clear to me that the benefits of banning term time holidays outweigh the negatives. Or, it is undeniable that banning term time holidays is totally necessary. Having any of these 4 thesis statements at the end of your introduction, as opposed to, in my opinion, term time holidays should be banned, will really engage the reader's interest in your essay. Moving on to the body of the opinion section, despite the fact that I highly recommend only 2 arguments, a few of my students tried to squeeze 3 arguments into their essays. This is perhaps because longer argumentative essays are usually 5 paragraphs. They contain an introduction, 3 arguments, and a conclusion. However, that type of essay is usually 400 to 500 words. In the TEM-4 exam, the time limit and word limit means that you can only write 2 arguments. 2 strong, detailed arguments are much better than 3 thin arguments. Secondly, remember that, in your body section, you must have separate paragraphs for each argument. However, a few of my students combined their 2 arguments into one huge paragraph. Perhaps they did this because the structure of an argumentative essay is often compared to the structure of a burger or a sandwich. In this analogy, the meat, which is the body section, is thicker than the 2 pieces of bread, which are the introduction and the conclusion. However, this analogy refers to the sections of the essay, not the paragraphs of the essay. So, the body is one section, even though it contains multiple paragraphs. Therefore, regarding my students' writing, the essays that were easier to read and follow had separate paragraphs for the arguments. If a student had one big body paragraph, then it was sometimes difficult to understand the boundaries of the arguments, especially if he or she did not signal them clearly with words like firstly, secondly, furthermore, moreover. So, please remember that you must not put your arguments in one paragraph. Next, regarding the evidence that my students use to support their arguments, I will firstly discuss the disadvantages of a lack of evidence. In the episode on my channel about how to write an argumentative essay, I explained 3 things. Firstly, the crucial importance of evidence for increasing the validity and believability of your arguments. Secondly, the fact that common sense cannot be used as a form of evidence. Thirdly, how common sense can become conjecture. Therefore, your essay will get a lower grade if it lacks evidence, and if the support of the topic sentence is mostly based on conjecture. To fully understand this concept, I recommend that you re-watch the section in the argumentative essay episode about how to support your arguments. However, I can briefly repeat myself now. Basically, conjecture is an opinion that lacks real evidence. Instead, the writer assumes that the opinion is true, based on the assumption that the reader already agrees with the writer. If that sounds confusing, then I will show you examples of this soon. But right now, please remember that even if something seems true, you cannot assume that it is true. You must have objective, external support for every claim that you make. An essay that relies on conjecture and common sense to support its viewpoint will get a very low grade. However, if you think you used conjecture in your essay, then you do not need to delete it entirely. Instead, it is easy to turn conjecture into an anecdote. I will show you how to do this in the next section. But remember that both arguments must use a type of objective evidence. Because an anecdote is a type of subjective evidence, then you can only include this as additional support for a type of objective evidence. So you will need to write a new piece of objective evidence and then convert your conjecture into an anecdote as additional support for it. To follow up what I just said, to be blunt, objective evidence always gets a higher grade, because it is more believable, valid, and persuasive than lower quality subjective evidence. So, the 2 arguments in the TEM-4 essay must be primarily supported with high quality evidence. However, if you have an amazing anecdote or analogy that you really want to share with the reader, then you can use one piece of subjective evidence to add additional support to your arguments. Thus, you can use an anecdote or analogy which are the only two valid types of subjective evidence, alongside a statistic or a quote, for example. However, do remember that you cannot use common sense, because it can easily become conjecture, and that is too weak for the TEM-4 essay. Remember that the essay instructions state you should support yourself with information from the excerpt. You don't absolutely need to do this, but feel free to quote from the article at least once in your essay. However, you must find a balance, because you cannot rely too much on the article for your arguments and evidence. You must mostly use original arguments and evidence. As you do more practice, you will find this balance. Most students believe that the first part of the conclusion, the thesis echo, is essential, and the second part, the so what statement, is optional. However, not including the so what statement wastes a valuable opportunity to show the reader that you fully understand the arguments you have presented, because the so what statement reveals your thoughts on the significance and the implications of your conclusion. Not including it certainly weakens the power and impact of the essay. If you want more information about writing an effective so what statement, then watch the episode on my channel about writing an argumentative essay. It is common in my students' TEM-4 essays for the so what statement to be omitted. This is probably because it can be difficult to write a strong conclusion within the time limit. Of course, there is so much to do in only a short amount of time, which is why planning effectively is important. This is because if you planned well, then you already thought about the conclusion, so there is less pressure to think of an interesting so what statement when you only have 1 or 2 minutes to finish your essay. Usually, in the weaker essays, the thesis echo mostly repeats the same words as the thesis statement. Remember that it should repeat the meaning, but not exactly the same words or grammar. If you are unsure how to do this, then watch the episode about argumentative essays, because I explained in detail how to convert the thesis statement into the thesis echo by changing the words, yet keeping the meaning. If you are running out of time, then it is still possible to write a quick so what statement. And a simple so what statement is better than none at all. Here is a simple example. To conclude, it is undeniable that term time holidays should be banned. If you are a parent, you should value your child's education more than a holiday. As you can see, a simple so what statement is definitely more effective than finishing your essay with only your thesis echo. Remember that the argumentative essay section of the TEM-4 exam, which I refer to as the opinion section, is based on an instruction. The instruction for the 2016 essay is comment on whether parents should take children out of school for holidays during term time in order to save money. Therefore, you have a choice of which side to support. The much more common viewpoint is that parents should not be able to take their children on term time holidays. Or, in other words, that term time holidays should be banned. However, it is definitely possible to support the opposite viewpoint, which is that families should be allowed to take term time holidays. This topic is undoubtedly more difficult, and for more difficult viewpoints, there are fewer strong arguments and less high-quality evidence, and in general, it is more difficult to persuade the reader that your viewpoint is valid. Therefore, if you choose this viewpoint, you must think carefully about creating very strong arguments and selecting convincing evidence, because the majority of evidence and arguments is weak for more difficult topics. I am certainly not encouraging you to choose the easier viewpoint if you actually disagree with that viewpoint. On the contrary, I encourage you to follow your heart and argue what you believe. Nevertheless, you must be careful if you choose the more difficult side of the topic. From what I have seen in my students' essays, the best arguments for this topic are, firstly, it saves money, and poor families will not get any holidays if they can only travel during official holiday periods. 2. Travelling during holidays is too crowded and stressful, and that defeats the purpose of a holiday. And 3. There is no time to travel during holidays because children have too much homework. I am sure many of us agree with the third argument. At university, teachers often give so much homework during the holidays that by the start of the next semester, we need a holiday to recover from the holiday. As there are usually a lot of weak arguments for the more difficult side of a topic, it is important to think more carefully about the arguments that you choose to include. From what I have seen in my students' essays, the worst argument for this side of the topic is, children study so hard at school, so they deserve a holiday whenever they want. This is unconvincing, as it does not explain why the holiday cannot happen during the official holiday period. Instead, this argument supports a topic like, children should be allowed to go on holiday. Of course, the real topic is very different from the topic that this weak argument supports, so the argument is weak because it is irrelevant to the real topic. This raises a wider point that you must remember. Even if you are nervous or in a hurry because of the short time limit, you must remember to read the essay instructions carefully. If you don't do this, it is likely that you won't fully understand the task and the topic of the essay. It's easy to tell if an essay is discussing a slightly different topic than the actual topic. And if you do this, because you didn't read the instructions carefully, you would get a very low grade. Reading the instructions carefully, understanding what viewpoint you need to argue, and writing an essay that answers the question is essential. In the final section of this episode, we will see short sections from my students' 2016 opinion sections. For each of them, I will firstly read it, then please pause the video and decide what part of the structure it is, think about what you like about it, and think about how it could be better. Afterwards, I will share my thoughts with you. A 2015 study by educational researchers concluded that students' grades had no direct connection with whether they took term time holidays or not. This represents my opinion that parents should be allowed to take their children on holiday during school terms. This is an introduction, and it starts with a very good hook. Specifically, the type of hook is a statistic. It is also short and succinct, as the entire introduction is only 2 sentences. Most interestingly, you can see that the writer is arguing for the more difficult side of the topic, which is perfectly acceptable if it is your genuine opinion. You will not be penalized for choosing the more unusual side, as long as you still create a convincing set of arguments. A piece of late news shocked me entirely. That the parents were penalized into jail after they and their kid returned from a 1-month trip. This represents my opinion that parents should not take their children on holiday during the school term. The hook is a good anecdote, as it reports a piece of news that is relevant to the essay topic. To make it even better, I recommend making it even more specific, by stating the month and year that this event happened, and which country it happened in. Even if you make it up, it is more believable if it is specific. According to the senior source at the Department for Education, any time out of school has the potential to damage a child's education. Therefore, I strongly agree that parents should be banned from taking children out during the school term. A big advantage of this quote is that it is taken from the article. Because you should refer to the article throughout your essay, beginning with a quote from it is a great way to connect the article to your opinions about it. As a famous writer named Han said, "Practice is more important than reading." And this word represents my opinion that parents should take their children for holiday during school time. This hook contains a quote from a famous Chinese person. Assuming that it is correctly translated, then the quote does effectively introduce the writer's viewpoint. If you decide to begin your essay with a quote, then make sure it is appropriate and relevant to your topic. There is a saying, "Efficiency comes from diligence," said by Han Yu, a great educator in ancient Chinese. It means that if students want to rank first in study, they should always be hardworking. This saying can represent my opinion that parents should not take their children for holiday during the school term. Here is another quote. What I especially like about this hook is that the writer briefly explains who Han Yu is. This is a very good technique because it gives the reader the opportunity to fully understand your introduction. Another strength of this quote is that, despite the article being about the UK, the author of the quote is Chinese. This helps to connect your opinions to the essay topic, which is based on the situation in a foreign country. As the saying goes, "All work and no play make Jack a dull boy." I totally agree with this, so I think parents should be allowed to take their children on holiday during the school term. In the episode about writing an argumentative essay, I said that there are different types of quote. You can either use a direct quote from a specific person, or you can use a saying that cannot be attributed to one person, but which everyone knows. That is the case in this introduction, and both types are acceptable. There's an old saying going like, "All work and no play make Jack a dull boy," which never fails to have its followers. Nonetheless, due time and due place to perform it should be taken into account, which represents my idea that term time holidays should be abolished. Interestingly, the writer of this introduction used the same saying as the previous hook. However, there is a big difference between these two introductions. Whereas the previous one uses the hook to support its viewpoint that the holidays should not be banned, this introduction uses the quote to argue that they should be banned. Therefore, you can see that a contrast happens throughout the introduction to set up the opposite side of the viewpoint. This is effective and interesting for the reader. Holiday is definitely relaxing, and throughout the holiday we can acquire knowledge. As a Chinese proverb goes, "Men who travels knows more." However, parents taking their children on term time holiday is not only disturb children's education, but also have a bad influence on teachers and schoolmates. As I said before, a Chinese proverb to introduce an essay based on a foreign article will impress the reader. Also, the contrast is always interesting and unexpected for the reader, so it is a good choice for the hook in this essay, especially if you decide to choose the more difficult side of the topic, because it will doubly surprise the reader. There is a saying goes, "Traveling to thousands of places is better than reading thousands of books." It's true, but only in the proper time. This brings out my opinion that parents should not take children on holiday during the school terms. Again, this is a very good hook, which uses a quote combined with a contrast. From my point of view, I don't think that taking children out of school for a holiday during term time is a good idea. So far, we have only looked at effective introductions. To contrast this, let's look at some that are considerably weaker so that you know what to avoid. What you can see here is a complete introduction. There is no hook, and the thesis statement is, unfortunately, boring and too simplistic. The reader will not be interested in your arguments if you introduce them like this. The reasons why I believe parents should be banned from taking their children on term time holiday are as followed. This is not the thesis statement part of the introduction, it is the entire introduction. Thus, there is no hook. In my opinion, this is even weaker than the previous example. If you introduce your arguments like this, then you may as well not write an introduction. In my point of view, it's undeniable that parents should not take their children on term time holidays for the reasons that include 3 perspectives: education importance, respect to teachers, and study concentration. Here is an effective thesis statement. I really like the style here. It briefly summarizes the writer's 3 arguments in an interesting way, with a colon to separate the viewpoint from the reasons. You could use this structure in your essays. The only issue here is that this student therefore wrote 3 arguments, but you only need to write 2 in your TEM-4 essay. At first, there is no denying that education is more important than a holiday, because spending a holiday during term time will pose a threat to students' worthy endeavours. According to a study conducted by Peking University, those who went on term time holidays would obtain a 30% lower grade than others who did not. Besides, it is an irrespectful manner of spending holidays during term time for teachers, especially for those teachers who have a coherent arrangement of teaching schedule. Once students break the oriented arrangement, some teachers will get disappointed, which will do a harm to the teaching quality. Worse still, in some students' view, spending a term time holiday will also bring unexpected negative effects to those doesn't, because this gets them distracted from concentrating on study, which will damage their truancy level consequently. You are looking at an entire body section, not one paragraph of the body section. Thus, the writer has combined the arguments into one huge paragraph. As I said before, it is difficult for the reader to follow your discussion because it is difficult to know where one argument stops and another argument begins. You must have separate paragraphs for each argument, even if the paragraphs are quite short. First of all, we are supposed to put education ahead of holiday, due to the importance of it. According to a study published by Cambridge University in 2016, students who went on term time holidays got lower grades than who didn't. We all know the influence of education to people's life, thus this ban is of great meaning. On the next few pages, we will look at examples of well-written, complete body paragraphs, with an effective topic sentence, high-quality evidence, and a focused wrap-up sentence that is well connected to the topic sentence and evidence. Term time holidays, most importantly, damages children's education. A 2018 study published by Cambridge University found that 80% of those who took a leave of several days fell behind others and found it upsetting to catch up. It's unnecessary for children to suffer such annoying consequences. Here is another example. I especially like the wrap-up sentence, which ends with an exclamation mark. First, term time holiday will do harm to children's study. A 2016 study published by Cambridge University found that the grades of children who went on term time holidays were 30% lower than those who didn't. Taking children on a holiday distracted them from studying, deducted their ability of focusing on one thing. Therefore, children get lower grades, which strongly affect their future study. Again, this is a satisfying, complete paragraph, and is thus very persuasive. I especially like the final sentence, which is both a wrap-up sentence and a detailed interpretation of the evidence. Firstly, it is difficult for them to catch up after they return. A study by BBC reported that 80% of the students who took term time holidays felt frustrated about study when they came back. Let the statistics speak for themselves. It's obvious that taking term time holidays is bad for students' education. The persuasive language, "let the statistics speak for themselves," is very effective here, as it connects the evidence and the wrap-up sentence in an exciting way. Firstly, it will be difficult for students to catch up after they return. When they come back from their holidays, they will find that they have missed lots of lessons that can't be made up anymore. According to the statistic, 83% of students who took term time holidays failed to come back to their original ranks. Most of them tried to take extra lessons, but still failed. This paragraph starts well, and overall feels more substantial. This is probably because, between the topic sentence and the evidence, is a supporting sentence with additional explanation of the topic sentence. This extra sentence is a good bridge between the topic sentence and the evidence. So if your argument requires a lot of explanation, then I recommend 2 sentences to explain the argument. However, there is no wrap-up sentence, because the final sentence is additional explanation of the evidence. Thus, there is no conclusion based on the evidence and argument. Therefore, this paragraph feels unbalanced. Firstly, it is difficult for them to catch up after they return. A 2016 study by Oxford University shockingly discovered that the grades of children who took term time holidays were 40% lower than those whose parents valued their education. Compared to the previous example, this example feels underdeveloped and incomplete, even though both writers used the same argument. Firstly, it jumps into the evidence immediately after the topic sentence. There is nothing inherently wrong with this, but it feels abrupt compared to the previous example. Also, the wrap-up sentence is missing, which makes the argument feel unfinished. Firstly, children's education is far more important than a holiday. As we all know, children who are well educated usually have more opportunities and brighter futures than those who are not. According to a 2016 study published by Cambridge University, grades of children who went on holidays were 30% lower than those who didn't. I've highlighted 3 problems with this paragraph. The paragraph starts well with a valid topic sentence. However, the supporting sentence begins with, "as we all know." Here, the writer is using common sense to support the topic sentence. This is a bad idea because you cannot assume that the reader knows and agrees with this. You must prove every claim you make with logical explanation and evidence. Next, there is a problem with the evidence. So far, this kind of statistic has been used to support the argument that it is difficult for the holiday students to gain the same amount of knowledge as their classmates after they return from their holiday. there is a direct connection here. Their grades were 30% lower, which proves that it was difficult for them to catch up with their classmates. However, I cannot find a direct logical connection between the argument that people with more education have brighter futures and the evidence that your grades are lower if you go on holiday. There is an indirect association here, but it is not strong enough to support this argument. If you are confused, then perhaps it is clearer if I say it like this. Children's education is far more important than a holiday, because the grades of children who went on holidays were 30% lower than those who didn't. It simply does not make sense. A stronger piece of evidence, with a direct logical connection to the argument, would be to focus on the longer-term differences between those with more education and those with less. Perhaps the statistic could focus on the different salary amounts that more and less educated people earn, or the different job sectors that people can work in. For example, firstly, children's education is far more important than a holiday. As we all know, children who are well educated usually have more opportunities and brighter futures than those who are not. According to a 2016 study published by Cambridge University, adults who, as children, took term-time holidays earn on average 30% lower than those who did not. There is certainly a direct connection here. Finally, there is no wrap-up sentence, and so the paragraph ends abruptly. Last but not least, term-time holidays are a distraction to other schoolmates. As we are teenagers, it's very easy for us to imitate our classmates sightlessly. For example, I have a friend whose name is Li Ming. He is such a student. When he sees other students going on holiday, he also wants to go. The atmosphere of learning at class will not be so strong. What's more, there is a bad influence on every student's valuable education. For the next few pages, I will still show you complete body paragraphs, but instead of focusing on the paragraph as a whole, I will only look at the type of evidence. Although I previously said that you cannot only use subjective evidence, such as an anecdote, to support your argument, I would still like to show you the most effective way to use an anecdote. However, in your essay, I still believe that you should also include some objective evidence alongside an anecdote, such as a quote or a statistic. Nevertheless, assuming that you will also have some higher quality evidence, here is an example of a good anecdote. Lastly, term-time holiday are a distraction to other schoolmates. When I was in middle school, one of my best friends once took a term-time holiday. After seeing her posting photos online, I became jealous and I wanted to go on holiday myself, especially sometimes when she called me and shared her experience. I got distracted for a long time, and I assume that many of the students who experienced this would have felt the same way. Therefore, term-time holidays are a bad influence on others' education. Here is another valid anecdote. But remember, within your paragraph, in order to get the highest possible grade, you should also include a high-quality piece of evidence. An anecdote alone is not enough to support an argument if you want a top grade. Besides, not only is the term-time holiday bad for the participants themselves, but also it makes a bad influence on others. My roommate, Linda, took a term-time holiday to Australia last month. When she returned to school, everyone wanted to go to Australia for a term-time holiday after hearing her experience. As a result, our class behaved the poorest in the monthly exam. So, we should not take term-time holidays. Here is another valid anecdote. Firstly, children who take term-time holidays may find it hard to catch up after returning school. Education is like a marathon, and those who take a break on the halfway need to take great pains to keep pace with others. In this regard, it is not a wise choice to take a term time holiday, which may follow troubles in catching up with others. Let's look at some other types of evidence. This is an analogy. It works very effectively here, but, not to repeat myself, in an essay with 2 arguments, each argument needs objective evidence in addition to subjective evidence. So, while this is a great analogy, the paragraph needs to be augmented with additional evidence to increase its validity. First, education is more important than money, since, as the saying goes, knowledge change your fate. Of course, there are some trips organized on the purpose of education. Nevertheless, this form of knowledge has less influence on children because children usually highlight the pleasure and enjoyment of traveling. Thus, in a long run, school education is a wiser investment. Moving on to higher quality evidence, here is a quote of a well-known saying, which helps to support the argument. Firstly, children's education should be taken into prior consideration. As the proverb, "knowledge is power," advocated by Sir Francis Bacon, students will be left behind in school if they overlook their own education. Compared with term time holidays, to get indulged in learning is more meaningful and significant, since the command of diverse knowledge is of necessity. Here is another quote, but this time the writer has included the creator of the quote, which I highly recommend. Next, education is more important than holiday. Any time out of school has the potential to damage a child's education, said a senior source at the Department for Education. Parents should re-evaluate what is wasted during their children's term time holiday. The essay instructions recommend you to quote from the article, and so I suggest you do it at least once. Here is a great example of that. Here, it is used as the sole piece of evidence, which is acceptable because quotes are a high-quality piece of evidence, especially if they are from reputable sources. Term time holidays are a distraction to others, which is the last point of the reasons. Imagine that you are a student. What would you think when seeing other students given privilege to go on a vacation? In a word, what it can bring to others are only the disorder and indignation. Let's now look at some weak attempts at supporting the argument. In short, the only support of the topic sentence is a rhetorical question. Firstly, it is not a valid form of evidence, and secondly, it uses common sense, because a rhetorical question assumes that the reader will work out the answer. You must avoid this. Besides, education is a successive process. The knowledge we learn in our textbooks is arranged from the elementary to the profound, which will help us understand it more easily. If children miss out a few lessons for holidays, it will be difficult for them to catch up with the class while learning the previous classes themselves. This will possibly lead to poor academic performances. I mentioned the word conjecture earlier. It is essentially an opinion which is formed on the basis of incomplete information. Most simply, it is an argument without valid evidence. So, in an argument with conjecture, the writer makes a claim, but has no evidence to prove it. Therefore, the writer makes the claim because he or she assumes it is true, but does not present evidence to prove that it is true. This is a catastrophic weakness that will guarantee a low grade. In this paragraph, the conjecture starts from, if children miss out. This sentence is an assertion, because the writer claims that something will happen, but provides no external support for the assertion. This is followed by the weak assertion that something will possibly happen. This does not sound convincing, and without evidence, it is a thoroughly unpersuasive paragraph. Of course, if you say, "My evidence proves my claim," then you could sound arrogant. Therefore, if you want to show that you are not overly confident about something, then don't use weak words like possibly. Instead, you could say, "It is overwhelmingly likely that this will lead to poor academic performances." Or, "This will almost certainly lead to poor academic performances." Moreover, going on holidays during semester are not respectful to teachers. It is children's obligation to go to school and receive compulsory education, while skipping classes and going on holidays are disrespectful to the hard work their teachers have put in their classes. Also, having students absent for this reason in classes would make it hard for teachers to maintain orders and regulations, and bring great inconvenience to their work. Again, the support is conjecture, because it asserts that term-time holidays are disrespectful to teachers. That is probably true, but without any external evidence to support your claim, you cannot objectively make that claim. To fix this, after the sentence, "It is children's," you could add a quote from a teacher who said that he or she found it disrespectful when students were absent because of a holiday. Last but not least, term-time holidays are a distraction to other schoolmates. When a child sees other students are going on holiday, he will also want to go. Then he won't focus on the classes, and will start to feel unfair. So, term-time holidays also have a bad influence on other students. Again, it is conjecture to say A will lead to B, and B will lead to C. And making a strong conclusion in a wrap-up sentence on the basis of unsupported assertions is conjecture. You must avoid all of this if you want to get a high grade. I'm not going to read this because it is an entire essay, but I would like you to look at the overall shape of the essay. Visually, the structure of this essay is perfect. Each section is an appropriate length. There is a balance between the longer body and the shorter introduction and conclusion, and it is easy to follow each section because the paragraphs are separated nicely. The content of the essay is very good. One strength of this essay is that the first argument is based on a direct quote from the article. Many of my students' essays used the argument that education is more important than a holiday, but presented this as if it was their own original idea. But, in fact, this argument is taken from the article, so it is clever to fulfill the need to refer to the article and the need to create strong arguments at the same time. In conclusion, I strongly recommend that children should never be taken out during the school term time. Those parents who break the rules should be severely punished. This conclusion ends with a recommendation so what statement, which is short and simple, yet relevant and satisfying. This demonstrates that you don't need to panic about the so what statement. It can be as simple or as complex as you want. But not including it makes your conclusion and your overall line of argumentation much less satisfying. To close this off, parents taking children for term time holiday is an advantageous behavior and should be provocated. Besides, a strict set of rules about it should be put forward so that the term time holiday makes the most of it. This conclusion contains a more detailed so what statement, but it is nevertheless very doable in a TEM-4 essay. You don't need to overthink the so what statement. The two you have seen here are definitely better than nothing. This is the end of the video about the opinion section of the TEM-4 2016 essay. If you liked what you heard, then you can find more videos in my writing skills series, as well as other series on the topics of English and linguistics. Thank you for watching.